The night I nearly gave up on everything, she walked in with a pizza box, a smile, and eyes that looked at me like I was already somebody. That was the moment everything shifted. I was 34, broke, and drowning in the failing remains of a business I'd put my entire soul into. One tiny office in Des Moines, Iowa, with flickering lights, a dying copier, and a team of 2, me and my unpaid intern who hadn't shown up in weeks. I'd maxed out 3 credit cards, sold my car, and had just gotten an email that my last client was pulling out. I sat there, hands in my hair, completely lost, ready to call my father and beg for a job at his hardware store in Tulsa. I was ready to quit, to bury the dream, and vanish into a small, unremarkable life. But then she came in, Emily. My wife. My miracle. She didn't say anything at first. She just placed the pizza on my cluttered desk, brushed the stacks of unpaid invoices aside, and sat on the edge like this was just another night. Like we weren't seconds from total collapse. I looked at her, ashamed. Ashamed that I'd failed her, that I couldn't give her the life she deserved. But she didn't look at me like a failure. She looked at me like I was still the man she married. The man who promised her a future. And then she said something that would burn itself into my brain for the rest of my life. She said, maybe the business is failing because you're trying to build it alone. Maybe it's time to let someone else drive with you. She wasn't just talking about emotional support. Emily had a degree in marketing from UCLA and had worked for a big agency in Chicago before quitting to move with me to start the company. She had ideas. Big, bold, terrifying ideas. But I'd always shut her out, too proud, too stubborn, too insecure to let her in. That night, I handed her the keys, literally and metaphorically. I told her, then drive. Let's go wherever you see the road. And God, she took off. Within 2 weeks, she'd torn our website apart and rebuilt it from scratch. She rebranded the whole company, turned our old, tired logo into something sleek, clean, corporate. She cold-called 20 potential clients and got meetings with 5. She rewrote all our pitches. She redid our decks, our social media, even the way I answered emails. She was a machine. But she wasn't cold. She did it with fire. With love. With absolute belief that we weren't just meant to survive, we were meant to dominate. The first deal she landed was with a mid-sized logistics company out of Denver. $40,000 for a 6-month contract. I remember seeing the number on the screen and bursting into tears. She just laughed, wrapped her arms around me, and whispered, "That's just the beginning, babe." And it was. It really, really was. That Denver contract was the oxygen our lungs had been begging for, and once we took that first breath, it was like every part of us snapped awake. I remember driving back from that initial pitch meeting, Emily beside me, hands still trembling from the adrenaline, and she looked at me and said, "We're not chasing clients anymore. We're attracting them now." And I believed her. Because that's exactly what started to happen. Within a month, word had spread. Our rebranding was so clean, so sharp, that people thought we'd already leveled up. Perception became our weapon. Emily knew that image could be louder than reality, and she made us look like giants while we were still working out of a glorified storage closet. She started publishing thought leadership articles under my name, ghostwriting them at night while I slept, fueled by coffee and a kind of fire I'd never seen in another human. She pushed our content onto platforms I'd never even heard of. She made connections with LinkedIn influencers, hosted free webinars, and found every podcast in the B2B space willing to let me talk. She was relentless. And I was just trying to keep up. But success, even in small doses, is a drug. And it changes people. Not in the way you think, not always with greed or arrogance. Sometimes it exposes your wounds. The ones you've spent years pretending didn't exist. I started working 15, 18 hours a day. I stopped eating meals at home. I began turning down date nights. I convinced myself I was doing it for us. That every hour away from her was an hour building our future. But I wasn't building anything without her. I just didn't realize it soon enough. It all came to a head one night around 3 a.m. I was in the office, alone, buried in strategy decks and analytics reports, my eyes dry and red, and I looked up to see Emily standing in the doorway. No smile this time. No pizza. Just silence. She walked in, placed a divorce agreement on my desk, and sat down across from me. My throat closed. My heart stopped. I didn't even have words. And then she said I didn't sign it. But I had to write it. Because I need you to see what happens if you keep building without me. I broke. Not because of the paper, but because of the look in her eyes. Not anger. Not even sadness. Just empty. Tired. Like she was watching the man she loved get swallowed by a monster he created. And she was right. I'd let success become obsession. I'd confused momentum with meaning. And in doing so, I was losing the one person who built this thing with me. That night changed everything again. I didn't sleep. I sat in that office and stared at the document for hours. And in the morning, I didn't tear it up, I kept it. Taped it to the wall as a reminder that this empire meant nothing if the queen who built it with me walked away. From that night on, I stopped chasing scale and started fighting for balance. It wasn't easy. Momentum, once it grabs you, doesn't like to let go. There's always another call, another opportunity, another investor meeting you can't miss. But I made the calls shorter. I started going home before the sun disappeared. I took Emily out on Thursdays, no matter what. I stopped checking email in the middle of the night. And she noticed. Not right away. But slowly, piece by piece, she started to smile again. And when she smiled, God, it felt like the lights came back on. The thing is, when you start honoring what truly matters, somehow everything else starts flowing better too. Clients didn't leave. They trusted us more. We were more human, more grounded, more real. We weren't the hungry wolves anymore, we were the steady hands. And people wanted that. Emily started mentoring our team personally. She created a culture guide. She trained our junior hires not just in marketing, but in how to treat people. With grace. With confidence. With damn respect. And she wouldn't let anyone on the team forget why we started, because we believed small ideas could become big dreams if you poured enough love into them. 2 years later, we weren't just surviving, we were thriving. We moved out of that little office and into a glass building downtown. 63 employees. Clients in 6 states. A new product line in development. VC interests we didn't even chase, they came to us. And all of that because she wouldn't let me sink when I wanted to drown. Because she believed in something I couldn't even see. Because she knew that building a company doesn't mean building a brand, it means building a soul. I remember one particular day, a Thursday, of course. I came home early. Emily was in the kitchen, barefoot, music on low, dancing with a glass of red wine like she didn't have a care in the world. I stood in the doorway just watching her. This woman who rebuilt me from rubble. This woman who had more vision than I ever gave her credit for. She noticed me, smiled, and said, "You look like a man who finally came home." And I walked over, took her in my arms, and whispered, "You didn't just build this company. You built me." But the story didn't stop there. Because every mountain has another peak. And just when I thought we'd finally reached ours, she looked at me one night and said, "I think it's time we went global." I laughed. I thought she was joking. But she wasn't. And that's when phase 2 of our empire began. She showed me the map the next morning, literally a massive world map spread across our dining table with pins stuck in cities I could barely pronounce. Tokyo, Berlin, Sao Paulo, Dubai. She'd spent months researching markets, studying competitors, identifying gaps. While I was busy running the daily operations, she had been quietly constructing a blueprint for global expansion. "We don't just have a product," she told me. "We have a system. And systems scale." My first instinct was fear. What if we overreached? What if we collapsed under the weight of our own ambition? But she silenced all that with one line: "What's the point of climbing if you stop at the middle?" We started with London. It made the most sense: English-speaking, strong tech market, and a network we could tap into through one of our current partners. Emily flew there first. I stayed behind to manage things at HQ, but every night she called me, breathless, alive, excited like I hadn't seen her since our early days. She locked down meetings with firms that were 10 times our size. And yet she sat across from their executives like she belonged there because she did. She wasn't intimidated. She was electric. 1 month later, she secured a partnership that instantly doubled our reach and put us in front of an audience we never thought we'd have access to. That's when the media started paying attention. Business blogs, podcasts, even a spot on a national tech segment. But they weren't interested in me. They wanted her. The woman behind the empire. The strategist. The visionary. I watched from backstage as she gave interviews that made CEOs look like amateurs. She spoke in calm, clear, deliberate waves, every word measured, every smile intentional. She didn't just answer questions, she owned the room. And in those moments, I realized something I should have known all along: I wasn't the face of the company. She was. She had always been. I'll never forget the night I told her that. We were in a hotel room in London, lights dim, both of us exhausted from back-to-back meetings. I looked at her across the bed and said, "You know you're the reason this exists, right?" She didn't answer right away. Just looked at me with those deep, thoughtful eyes and said, "We're the reason. You just forgot it for a while." Her grace humbled me. We launched our international division that quarter. 3 more countries. New hires. Sleepless nights. But this time we did it together. Every decision was shared. Every milestone celebrated. And the more we grew, the more I saw the shift not just in our company but in the world around us. People started calling her the engine, the queen, the reason small companies dared to dream big. And I just kept thinking how close I came to losing all of this. All of her. But I wasn't going to lose her. Not again. No matter how big we got. No matter how high we climbed. We didn't realize it right away, but our story had started turning into something bigger than a business. People weren't just buying from us, they were watching us. Studying us. Aspiring to become us. And that terrified me. Because the higher you go, the louder the whispers get. The more successful you appear, the more strangers start rewriting your story for you. There were blogs that called me a genius, industry analysts who praised my leadership, and still, somehow, Emily was being framed as the supporting figure. The wife behind the CEO. The quiet engine behind the loud machine. And I could see it slowly eating away at her even if she smiled through it. It happened during a conference in Austin. We were both speaking, her on branding, me on scale, and after the event, a journalist pulled me aside for an interview. First question he asked, "What's it like having a wife who stays home so you can focus?" My mouth went dry. My blood boiled. I stared at him and said she built this company. I just kept it running. He laughed like I was being humble. I didn't laugh back. I ended the interview early and walked straight out of that building. That night, in the hotel room, I told her what happened. She didn't flinch. She just said, "This is how the world works. But we're gonna change it. Not by yelling. By winning." And that's exactly what she did. Emily founded a new division inside our company, an initiative focused solely on lifting women in tech and marketing. Not as a side project. As a core pillar of our operations. She called it Root because every strong company needs roots, and women have been the roots of business since the beginning, just too often buried. It exploded. Applications poured in from every state. We funded 25 startups in our first year. 50 the next. She started mentoring women personally, coaching founders, opening doors that had always been locked to people like her. And still, she never asked for credit. I tried. I tried to push her forward, to make her the face of the company. But she didn't want that spotlight, not for ego. She wanted it for impact. "We don't need more stars," she said. "We need more launch pads." Every now and then, though, the pressure caught up with her. I'd see her sitting on the edge of her bed, staring at nothing, trying to hold up the weight of thousands of people's expectations. And that's when I realized she was no longer building a company. She was carrying a movement. And movements, they break you if you're not careful. So I made a decision. Not to step down. Not to walk away. But to finally match her. If she was going to carry the weight of something bigger than both of us, then I was going to carry her. No more being the CEO who smiled for the cameras while she rebuilt the world behind the scenes. No more hiding her brilliance in press releases or pretending I was the genius in boardrooms. It was time everyone saw who the real architect was. I called an emergency board meeting the following Monday. Every exec, every partner, every regional lead was there, some in person, others blinking in from Zoom, their suits crisp and voices firm, ready for some kind of strategic update. I stood at the head of the table, looked every single one of them in the eye, and said something I'd never said out loud before, effective immediately. Emily Harrison is co-CEO of this company. Not just in title. In power. In visibility. In equity. She has been running this business beside me from day one, and I won't allow her brilliance to be sidelined any longer. Silence. A long one. Then someone clapped. Slowly at first. Then faster. Then others joined. And before I knew it, the room was filled with applause, not the forced kind, not the polite kind. The kind that said, "Finally." The kind that said, "We see her too." Emily wasn't in the room when it happened. I wanted to surprise her. To give her that moment not because she asked for it, but because she earned it more than anyone I'd ever known. I recorded it on my phone, walked back into our office, and handed her the video without a word. She watched it in complete silence, tears slipping down her face without shame, without apology. When it ended, she didn't speak. She just stood up, walked around the desk, and kissed me like we were 25 again, hungry, invincible, scared, and unstoppable all at once. That same month, we launched our biggest initiative yet, Project North, a platform designed to help small businesses globally scale their operations using our model. Emily led the charge. She held summits in Cape Town, Singapore, Vancouver. She trained executives, mentored founders, rewrote entire business models for companies on the edge of collapse. Everywhere she went, people treated her not like a guest, but like a leader. A force. A blueprint. Her name started showing up on international lists. Forbes. Fast Company. Business Insider. Not next to mine, instead of mine. And I cheered the loudest every time. We were no longer a company. We were an ecosystem. And Emily was its son. But then came the price. Because when you grow this fast, when your name becomes a brand and your face becomes a symbol, people stop seeing your humanity. They see opportunity. They see leverage. And somewhere in all of that admiration, someone decided to come for her. Not to criticize. To destroy. It started small. An anonymous blog post accusing Emily of inflating her resume. A fake LinkedIn comment chain alleging that she'd stolen ideas from a previous employer. Screenshots. Fabricated receipts. People who had never met her acting like experts. And worse, people who had worked with her staying silent out of fear or cowardice. She ignored it at first. Said it would blow over. But it didn't. It caught wind. It spread like gasoline on fire. And suddenly, the woman who built an empire from scraps was being torn apart by people who never saw the nights she stayed up till dawn building futures for strangers. The internet turned brutal overnight. Headlines mutated into weapons. Was Emily Harrison a fraud all along? Empire built on lies? Silicon Valley's sweetheart or strategic manipulator? They didn't care about truth. They cared about clicks. And the people behind those articles didn't know her voice, her fight, or her sacrifices. They didn't know the woman who fed interns from her own paycheck, who took calls with single mothers at midnight just to help them save their small businesses, who used her platform not to shine but to lift others up. They didn't know her, but they acted like they did. The worst moment came one morning when she opened her email and found a message that just said, "You'll be nothing without him." Just one sentence. No name. No signature. And that was the first time I saw her break. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just sat there, perfectly still, as if moving would make it worse. As if the noise, the betrayal, the lies had finally reached some dark place in her that not even she could fight back from. I sat down across from her and said, "Say the word and I'll burn it all down." She smiled, but it was a tired, broken thing. "No," she whispered. "We don't fight fire with fire. We rebuild. We always rebuild." And she did. Emily hired a private investigator to track the origin of the blog. Within 2 weeks, we had names. A competitor. A former agency colleague who resented her success. And a jealous ex-founder who tried to poach her years ago and failed. We took the evidence straight to court. Filed a defamation suit that shook the industry. And while the legal team did their job, Emily did hers. She went quiet. Not out of fear. Out of strategy. She used the silence to build something even louder. She wrote a letter not to the press, not to the courts, but to the people. Our clients. Our partners. Our team. She told the truth. Every line of it. The struggle, the rise, the betrayal, the pain. She told them what she stood for, what she would never apologize for, and what kind of future we were still going to build together. I watched her record that video message, her voice steady, her spine straight, her eyes sharper than I'd ever seen. And when she was done, she looked at me and said, "Let's see if the world still wants the truth." They did. The letter went viral in less than 48 hours. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was real. People saw her again. The woman. The builder. The survivor. Messages flooded in. Founders. Mothers. CEOs. Activists. People we hadn't heard from in years. People we didn't even know. They told her she gave them courage. That her honesty made them believe again. That her pain gave them permission to speak up too. And just like that, the tide turned. The blogs went silent. The lawsuits moved forward. And Emily? She didn't just survive the storm. She became it. The day the lawsuit was settled, the headlines changed. Emily Harrison vindicated. Defamation case ends in massive victory. Truth wins. But none of that mattered to her. She didn't celebrate with champagne or throw some lavish event. She didn't post a victory video or tweet a mic drop moment. She just walked into the office, hugged every employee on the floor, and went straight back to work like nothing had ever happened. That was who she was. Never louder than necessary. Never showy. Just strong. Focused. Unshakable. But I knew better. I knew what that storm had done to her. Because late at night, when the lights were off and the world went quiet, she'd still jolt awake from nightmares she couldn't explain. She started locking her phone in a drawer. She deleted social media off her devices. She stopped reading articles about us, even the good ones. She didn't say it out loud, but I could see it in her eyes. They don't get to have me anymore. And part of me was glad. Because for years she gave pieces of herself to people who only wanted the surface. She gave everything. And they still tried to break her. I started handling the press. The public speaking gigs. The interviews. I told every outlet the truth. I was never the genius. She was. I was just lucky enough to stand beside her. And finally, the world started listening. They stopped calling her the CEO's wife and started calling me Emily Harrison's husband. And God, I wore that title like a crown. Root expanded to 12 countries. Project North went live in Asia with a waiting list of over 3,000 applicants. And in the middle of it all, Emily came to me one night barefoot in the kitchen, stirring tea with that familiar quiet fire in her eyes, and said, "I want to take a break." I thought she meant a vacation. A week on the beach, maybe some time in the mountains. But she shook her head. A real break. I want 6 months. Off-grid. No work. No calls. Just life. And I said yes. No hesitation. No second thoughts. Because I knew if she didn't refill her soul, she'd have nothing left to give. Not to me. Not to the company. Not to herself. So we did it. We handed off operations to our senior execs. We set boundaries so hard and high not even investors could climb over them. We packed 2 bags, left our phones behind, and disappeared into a quiet part of northern Italy. Just the 2 of us. A villa with no Wi-Fi. A garden with overgrown lavender. Mornings with nothing but fresh bread, black coffee, and slow silence. Afternoons walking cobbled streets, laughing like we were 22 again. Nights curled together under thick blankets, windows open to the soft sound of wind through the olive trees. And in those 6 months, something healed. Not just in her. In me too. Because for the first time in years, I wasn't the CEO. I wasn't the strategist. I wasn't the husband to a global icon. I was just a man. Falling in love with his wife all over again. We came back different. Lighter. Not just rested, but restored. That trip didn't just give us a break, it gave us perspective. We realized the empire we built was never supposed to be the destination. It was the vehicle. The real prize? Each other. The life we almost lost chasing everything else. So when we stepped off the plane back in the States, there was no grand announcement. No, we're back press release. Just a quiet return. And a brand new plan. Emily didn't rush back into her title. She walked into the office like a visitor. No entourage. No expectation. She sat in the back of meetings, listened more than she spoke, and let our team lead while she observed. Some thought she was done. That she'd taken her seat in the background again. They had no idea she was planting seeds for the biggest shift we'd ever made. She called it the Eclipse model. A system that didn't just teach growth, it taught replacement. Emily had come to believe the most powerful thing a leader could do wasn't to hold on to the top, it was to make sure someone else could stand there when they left. And so, we began reworking the entire structure of our company. Flattening hierarchies. Creating rotation programs. Empowering teams to operate independently without executive oversight. She wanted to kill the myth of the one genius at the top. She wanted to make herself and me unnecessary. That scared our board. Terrified our investors. They begged us to reconsider. Warned us we'd lose control. One of them even said people don't trust faceless companies. And Emily replied, then maybe we shouldn't be a company anymore. Silence. I remember that moment like a bullet in the room. Everyone staring, trying to process what the hell she meant. She looked at me, then at them, and continued. We're not just building a company. We're building an institution. Something that lasts long after we're gone. If you want fast growth, sell your shares and go find another rocket. But if you want legacy, stay. Because what's coming next? It's bigger than all of us. I backed her completely. Because I finally understood, her dream wasn't about us becoming rich or famous. It was about creating something that couldn't be killed. A living, breathing ecosystem that could survive betrayal, failure, even death. Something that existed to serve, not to worship its founders. So we began our transition. We promoted 5 new regional directors. Handed over strategy divisions to younger voices. Invested in mental health resources for every employee. Instituted mandatory paid sabbaticals after 3 years of service. We cut our own salaries by half and redirected the money into an internal innovation fund that any employee could pitch an idea to. And the craziest thing happened. We didn't fall apart. We got stronger. Revenue rose. Retention improved. Culture deepened. And best of all, Emily started smiling again. Not the public smile. Not the boardroom smile. But that old, wild, rebellious grin that first made me fall in love with her. That's when I knew. She wasn't done dreaming. She was just getting started. The dream that came next wasn't corporate. It wasn't even capitalist. It was something far more radical. One night, we were sitting on the back deck of our cabin in Colorado, wrapped in blankets, a fire crackling low between us, when Emily turned to me and said, "What if we gave it away?" I laughed, not because it was funny, but because I thought I misheard her. "Gave what away?" I asked, staring at her through the flickering firelight. She didn't blink. "The company. The whole thing." I froze. Every instinct in me screamed no. We had spent over a decade building this, poured in our souls, sacrificed everything. And now she wanted to hand it over like a birthday gift? But she wasn't talking about quitting. She was talking about evolving. She laid it out like she'd been planning it for months. Transferring majority ownership of our company into a trust governed by employees. A perpetual ownership model. No shares. No buyouts. No shareholders calling the shots from their yachts. Just the people who built it running it. "You said you wanted to carry me," she whispered. "Then carry this with me. Let's be the founders who walk away not for money, but for meaning." I didn't answer right away. I sat with it, wrestled it, had long, silent conversations with myself. Fear and ego clashed in my chest like two wolves. But when I thought about it, really thought about it, I realized something brutal and beautiful. She was right again. We had enough. We didn't need more. And the people who gave their hearts to our vision deserved more than paychecks and performance reviews. They deserved ownership. So we did it. In secret. We worked with lawyers, economists, ethicists, even historians to design a structure that would last for generations. Took almost a year. And during that time, we didn't say a word to anyone outside the core planning team. Then, one crisp September morning, we gathered every employee in our headquarters atrium. A massive banner hung behind us, covered until the right moment. Emily stood up in front of 200 people, some wide-eyed, some skeptical, some already crying, and told them in plain, fierce words, "This company is now yours." We unveiled the banner. It read, "We built this together. Now you own it." There were gasps, stunned silence, and then tears, hugs, people dropping to their knees calling their families. One guy screamed, literally screamed. A woman who'd started as a part-time admin 5 years ago collapsed into Emily's arms. It wasn't just a gift. It was justice, a reward for loyalty, a radical act of love in an industry built on burnout and exit strategies. From that day on, we were no longer the owners. We became mentors, stewards, ghosts in the machine present but no longer needed to keep it alive. We didn't vanish. We stayed involved. But we gave up power. For real. And the craziest thing? The company didn't miss a step. If anything, it ran better. Because legacy isn't about being remembered. It's about leaving behind something that remembers others. People didn't believe it at first. Not the media, not our competitors, not even some of our closest friends. They thought it was a PR stunt, a tax dodge, a clever trick wrapped in a feel-good story. But as months passed and no gotcha moment came, no reversal, no loophole, just steady, transparent, powerful progress, the world started paying attention for real. Not because we were exceptional, but because we proved something radical. That it was possible to win without hoarding. That you could build an empire, hand over the keys, and still sleep at night. Emily started speaking again, this time not about marketing or entrepreneurship, but about transformation. Not the cute kind you put on mood boards, the deep, painful, revolutionary kind. She talked about letting go of control, about the cost of leadership, about power being the most dangerous drug you can pretend doesn't affect you. She said it's easy to build something. The hard part is stepping away and trusting it to live without you. Her TED Talk went viral in 3 hours. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't rehearsed. It was raw, honest. There were moments she almost broke down on stage. Moments she stared at the audience like she was looking for a reason to believe in them. And when she finished, there was no standing ovation, not at first. Just silence. A kind of sacred silence. Like the room was mourning all the years we lost thinking we had to own everything to matter. That night, our inbox flooded with messages from CEOs, founders, even investors. People who had spent decades climbing only to reach the top and feel nothing. People who admitted, with trembling hands and anonymous usernames, that they were tired. Lonely. Trapped inside golden cages, Emily responded to every single one of them. Personally. Not with advice. Not with pitch decks. Just with truth. She told them if you don't want to own it anymore, you don't have to. That one sentence turned into a movement. We launched a nonprofit called Exit Integrity, a blueprint system for founders who wanted to ethically transition their companies to employee ownership, stakeholder governance, or nonprofit models. We didn't charge for it. We funded it ourselves. Because this wasn't business anymore. This was a crusade. A quiet revolution whispered in glass offices and tired hearts. And through it all, our life, mine and hers, became so simple. No board meetings. No performance targets. No constant stream of decisions. We'd wake up, take long walks, read in silence, cook together. Sometimes she'd paint. I started woodworking, something I hadn't done since I was a kid. We hosted dinners. Not the networking kind. The barefoot, candlelit, wine spilled, laugh till you can't breathe kind. And I remember one night, after everyone had gone home and the dishes were stacked high in the sink, I looked at her across the messy table and said, I didn't know peace could feel like this. She reached for my hand, squeezed it, and whispered back, this is what we were building the whole time. And she was right. Because what we built was never about products, clients, or profits. It was about freedom. It was around that time, when everything was soft and quiet and finally ours again, that something unexpected happened, something neither of us had planned for or even thought possible anymore. We got a letter. Not an email. A real, physical letter. Handwritten. The return address was from a small town in Kentucky we'd never heard of. Inside was a note from a woman named Clara who ran a community center that had been on the verge of shutting down until Root gave them a microgrant. She didn't know who to thank. She just wanted someone to know what it meant. She wrote about the kids who came in every afternoon, how some of them didn't speak for weeks until they finally felt safe. How the grant helped them build a kitchen where teenagers could cook together instead of wandering the streets. How one girl, who hadn't smiled since her mother died, had started singing again. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't newsworthy. But it hit us like a truck. Because for all the articles, all the awards, all the podcast features and conference panels, this quiet miracle in Kentucky was the reason Emily did any of it. She framed the letter. Hung it above her desk, right where her vision board used to be. Everything starts small, she said one morning, tracing the edge of the frame. We forget that. But those are the seeds that matter. That sparked something in her. A new idea. A new flame. She wanted to start a storytelling initiative. A place where people like Clara, small business owners, community leaders, silent changemakers, could tell their stories without filters, without needing to be impressive by some media standard. She called it the table. Because everyone, she said, deserved a seat at one. We funded videographers. Built a mobile team. Traveled state to state capturing raw, beautiful, messy stories of people building meaning in the cracks of forgotten places. No scripts. No angles. Just real life. The project exploded, not because it was viral, but because it was true. People were starved for sincerity. They were tired of curated success and polished failure. They wanted grit, love, hope, and the table gave them that. Emily hosted the first series herself, just her and the guest sitting across from each other, 2 coffee mugs between them, no lights, no audience. Just conversation. And my God, the way she listened. She had this gift, she could make a stranger feel like the center of the world in 30 seconds flat. I watched one episode where a woman talked about losing everything in a flood. Her home. Her shop. Her sister. Emily didn't interrupt. Didn't nod with fake sympathy. She just held her hand across the table and whispered, "You're still standing." That's enough. Millions watched it. Not because it was sensational. Because it was sacred. We started getting letters from schools. Shelters. Even prisons. People saying they finally felt seen. That maybe they weren't failures. That maybe starting over wasn't shameful, it was brave. And through it all, I watched Emily grow into something even more powerful than a leader. She became a mirror. Reflecting people back to themselves when they had forgotten who they were. There was this one night, deep fall, trees on fire outside our cabin window, wind hissing low like the past whispering through the cracks, that I saw her sitting on the floor with stacks of those letters from the table spread out around her like a nest. No makeup, no performance, just barefaced and barefoot, holding people's pain in her hands like it was something holy. I sat beside her, didn't speak. I knew she was holding something heavy, something she hadn't said yet. Finally, she looked at me with eyes that seemed older than they were and said, "I used to think I had to save the world to prove I mattered. But maybe just holding space for it is enough." And that broke me in the best way. Because she'd spent so long doing, fighting, building, carrying the weight of other people's futures that I forgot she hadn't just changed the world. She carried it. And now maybe, just maybe, it was time to let it rest. We decided that night to shut down our public speaking schedules indefinitely. No more summits. No more panels. We declined 5 awards that year. Politely. Gratefully. But firmly. Not because we didn't care, but because the point of the work had shifted. It wasn't about us anymore, and maybe it never had been. We turned down a book deal. Said no to a Netflix documentary proposal. We even ignored a ridiculous offer from a Fortune 100 company that wanted to acquire what remained of our brand licensing. Emily just smiled when she read that one and said, "Imagine trying to put a price tag on your soul." Instead, we focused on the letters. We started writing back. Handwritten. Every single one. People would open their mailboxes expecting more bills or political flyers and find a personal letter from Emily Harrison. No assistants. No stamps with printed signatures. Just her. Telling them she heard them. That they weren't invisible. That what they were building, even if it was small, even if it was fragile, mattered. She called it her quiet ministry. But make no mistake, it shook the world louder than any speech she'd ever given. I remember one woman from Alabama who wrote in after losing her husband. She ran a tiny bookstore on the edge of foreclosure. Emily's letter came during a week she was planning to close for good. But that letter, just a single page of warmth and truth, made her hold on for one more month. And in that time, a local teacher found the store, posted about it, and brought in a wave of new customers. The store survived. Barely. But it did. And the woman sent another letter 6 months later saying, "You didn't save my store. You saved me. And I saved it." That was the ripple. That was the whole damn point. Not the business. Not the empire. The echo. Emily wasn't just a woman who succeeded. She was a woman who stayed human while succeeding. Who never hardened. Never stopped feeling. Who let the world touch her, bruise her, and somehow still came back with open hands and a soft voice. And that softness, it changed people. One letter at a time. But even softness has a cost. That winter, something shifted in her body, slowly at first, then all at once. She started sleeping more. Her appetite faded. She winced every time she climbed stairs, brushed it off with a joke, but I knew something was wrong. She'd always had this uncanny ability to absorb pain and push through it like it was nothing, but this was different. I watched her pour from a well that was finally running dry. And for the first time in our lives, she couldn't hide it. We went to the doctor. Blood tests. Scans. Questions. Long silences in cold waiting rooms. And then answers. Not the kind you ever want to hear. It wasn't terminal. But it was serious. An autoimmune condition triggered by years of chronic stress. Her body, after carrying so many people, so much pressure, so many expectations, it had finally decided it couldn't carry her anymore. The doctor said she'd need to slow down. A lot. No travel. No late nights. No emotional overexertion. "It's not about dying," he said gently. "It's about staying alive the right way." I looked at her across the sterile white room, and for the first time in all our years together, she looked scared. Not for herself, but for what would be left undone. For all the people she hadn't reached. For all the stories still waiting to be heard. For all the letters left unanswered. That night, back at the cabin, she curled into me like she hadn't done since we were newlyweds. She didn't speak. Just trembled quietly against my chest, her breath jagged, eyes wide open in the dark like she was trying to memorize the ceiling before life changed again. And I held her like it was the only thing I'd ever been meant to do. Because maybe it was. From that moment on, everything changed. Not in a loud way. In a gentle, deliberate unraveling. She stepped back from the table. Passed the torch to one of her protégés, a young woman from Detroit who'd once lived in a shelter and now stood on stages teaching resilience like she'd invented it. We turned our foundation into a collective, decentralized it, let the next generation lead. Emily wrote one final open letter, published not on a glossy site, but printed in a small-run zine distributed by hand at community centers, coffee shops, and street corners. It was called What I Meant to Build. It was part confession, part instruction manual, part love letter to every broken-hearted dreamer who'd ever wondered if they mattered. She ended it with this line. "If you're reading this, it means the story reached you. That's enough. You're enough. Now go build something kind." People framed that letter. Tattooed lines from it on their arms. Taught it in community college business classes. Quoted it in wedding vows. A line from that letter even showed up as graffiti under a bridge in Boston, sprayed in neat white letters across rusted brick. Love is infrastructure. And through it all, Emily rested. Not idly. Not like someone who'd given up, but like someone who finally understood the value of stillness. Her days became slower, softer, more deliberate. Tea in the morning, sketching by the fire, reading books she never had time for. She wrote in journals not for publishing but for remembrance. I caught her smiling at old pictures sometimes. Not with nostalgia, with completion. And when people asked what she was doing now, she'd just smile and say, "I'm not building anymore. I'm becoming." Spring came late that year, as if the world itself was taking a breath alongside her. The trees outside our window bloomed slow and soft, hesitant like they too were learning to be gentle again. And Emily, she was quieter than ever but never absent. Her silence wasn't distance, it was presence. She didn't need to say much anymore. Her energy filled the room before her voice ever did. You could feel it when she walked into a space, that calm gravity that made even the most chaotic minds slow down and breathe. And then something beautiful happened. One morning, while we were sitting on the porch with warm mugs and sleepy eyes, a woman parked her car at the edge of our long driveway and walked up the hill toward us. She looked nervous, clutching something wrapped in brown paper. I started to rise, but Emily touched my arm, gently motioning for me to stay seated. The woman introduced herself. Her name was Layla. She'd flown from Oregon. She said she wasn't sure what she was hoping for, just that she needed to say thank you in person. She unwrapped the brown paper and revealed a painting. It was of Emily. Not as a CEO, not on a stage, but as she was right now, gray sweater, coffee cup, barefoot on the porch, wind in her hair. It was stunning. Not flawless. Not hyperrealistic. Just true. The way her eyes held softness and steel at the same time. The way her jaw held grace even in stillness. Layla said, "You saved me. I was in a halfway house 3 years ago watching your first table interview on a borrowed phone. You said, 'You're not broken, you're building.' That line? That line made me stay alive another day." Emily didn't cry. She didn't shrink away from the praise or try to minimize it. She stood up, walked down the porch stairs, and hugged Layla so hard I swear I saw both of them exhale the same breath. And that's when I realized something profound. Emily wasn't just someone who changed lives. She had become a landmark, a place people came back to when they felt lost. A quiet shape on the horizon reminding them that love, integrity, and purpose were still possible in a world hellbent on making you forget. After Layla left, we hung the painting in the hallway. No spotlight, no fancy frame, just a small brass plate under it with one word, witness. Because that's what Emily had become. Not a builder, not a CEO, not a founder, but a witness to what the world could look like when someone dares to lead with tenderness instead of ego. In the months that followed, more people came. Not in crowds, just one at a time. A man who'd left corporate law to start a food truck that hired former inmates. A mother who launched a trauma-informed daycare center in memory of her son. A veteran who used his pension to fund youth boxing classes and prevent gang recruitment. All of them carried her words like scripture. And all of them left something behind: letters, photos, hand-carved trinkets, homemade jam, tiny framed quotes they lived by. Emily turned our guest room into a memory library. Not just a place for these gifts, but a sacred archive of what mattered. Not net worth, not legacy metrics, lives touched. Dreams resurrected. Courage multiplied. Grace amplified. And one afternoon, while cataloging a box of handmade journals someone had sent from Detroit, she turned to me, smiled through soft tears, and whispered, "Maybe this is the company we were always supposed to build." After that day, everything slowed even more, like time itself had started walking instead of running. Emily took fewer steps, but each one landed deeper. She started rising later in the mornings, moving quieter through the house, her hands always brushing over the framed memories that lined our hallway. She wasn't fading. No, it was something else. She was settling. Like an old tree rooting deeper into the earth, not reaching upward anymore, but holding everything below steady. We stopped using the word retirement. It didn't fit her. She wasn't retreating from the world. She was redefining her place in it. She said, "I used to want to be the one who moved the mountain. Now I just want to be the stone someone else steps on to reach higher." And she meant it. Every time someone visited, she listened more than she spoke. Gave them tea, stories, space. Sometimes they cried. Sometimes they laughed. But they always left different. And me? I became her shadow. Her witness. Her scribe. I started writing down the things she said in passing, little insights dropped like breadcrumbs from some part of her heart I still hadn't fully mapped. One day, while we were walking through the woods behind our house, she stopped beside a fallen tree and said, "Even the broken ones hold the soil together." I wrote that down when we got home. Pinned it above my desk. Still read it every morning. But then, the quiet deepened. Her body slowed in ways I couldn't pretend not to see anymore. Some mornings she didn't make it out of bed. Her hands began to tremble. The long walks turned to short ones, then to sitting on the porch while I walked alone. And still she smiled. Not out of denial, but defiance. She'd look at me with tired eyes and whisper, "Don't mourn me early. I'm still here." And I'd nod, even though every part of me wanted to scream against time, against biology, against the betrayal of a body that had held so much, done so much, given so much. The doctors adjusted her treatment. More medications. Slower weeks. But Emily refused to call herself sick. She said, "I'm not breaking down. I'm just breaking open." I didn't know what that meant until the letters started pouring in again, twice as many as before. People who had heard whispers about her health. Who wrote not out of pity, but reverence. They didn't ask her to get well. They thanked her. For the ideas. For the courage. For giving them a model of what it meant to lead without armor. We read every single one. Some aloud. Some in silence, side by side in bed, our fingers brushing as we turned pages. And one night, as the wind howled outside and the house seemed to breathe with us, she looked over and said, "When I'm gone, keep telling them. Not about me. About them. Their strength. Their grit. Their goodness. Remind them what they're capable of." I couldn't respond. My throat closed. My chest tightened. So I just held her hand and she squeezed it like she always did when words weren't needed. In the weeks that followed, she slept more. Spoke less. But her presence, it was thunderous. Even in silence, she made you feel like the earth was listening. And I knew. The time was drawing near. The morning it happened, the sky was an unnatural shade of still gray, like the world knew something sacred was about to shift. I woke up before her, something that hadn't happened in months, and for a moment I just lay there watching her breathe. Her face was calm, more peaceful than I'd seen it in years. No pain lines. No tension. Just a quiet grace, like the universe had finally eased its grip on her. I made her tea just the way she liked it, chamomile with honey and a tiny splash of oat milk. When I came back, her eyes were open but distant, like she wasn't seeing the room anymore. Like she was seeing through it. She smiled. Not wide. Just a soft curve that said everything her mouth didn't need to. I sat beside her. Held her hand. And she whispered, "Did we do it right?" And I broke. Not with sobs. With something quieter. A crumbling inside my chest like sand slipping through fingers. I kissed her forehead, held her tighter, and whispered back, "You did it better than anyone ever has." She nodded once. Her eyes fluttered closed. And sometime between that breath and the next, she let go. No gasp. No fight. Just release. Like the last note of a song that's been playing forever. The world didn't stop. The trees still moved outside. A bird sang, oblivious. But I stopped. Everything in me froze in that moment. Suspended between grief and reverence. Between love and loss. Between what she gave and what she left behind. The funeral was small. Her choice. She didn't want monuments or speeches or press. Just a gathering. Friends. Family. People who got it. We held it on the land behind the cabin, under the trees that had watched her become everything. No suits, no sermons, just stories. One by one they stood. A girl from Mississippi who used to be homeless, now running a non-profit shelter. An ex-addict who started a community garden because of one sentence Emily wrote in a letter. Grow something before you disappear. A man who had been suicidal until her table interview convinced him to stay alive just long enough to find out if the world had more to offer. They spoke not of her accomplishments, but of her impact. Not of the empire, but of the echo. And then, when everyone had spoken and the sun had started to lean west, I stood up with the last piece of her legacy in my hand. A letter she'd written in the final days. It wasn't long. Just one page. She'd titled it simply, "Don't make me the story." It said, "If you are here grieving me, don't. Grieve the parts of you I helped wake up. Grieve the silence I taught you to shout into. Grieve the broken parts of the world you're now brave enough to change. But me? No, I'm not gone. I'm just woven in now. In every hand held. In every word spoken gently. In every risk taken for love or truth or beauty. Don't make me the story. Make yourself the next one." Silence followed. No one clapped. No one needed to, because she'd said all that needed to be said. And left us with something so few ever do. A blueprint for becoming. The days after were a blur. An ache that settled in my bones like winter frost. Slow and deep and quiet. People came and went. Food arrived we didn't eat. Flowers filled corners she used to stand in. The house felt full and empty all at once, like it was trying to remember how to breathe without her heartbeat echoing in the walls. I moved like a man underwater. Every room I entered carried her fingerprints, the scent of her favorite tea, the scarf still draped over the chair by the fire, her handwriting on the fridge, reminding me to breathe, drink water, and look up once in a while. I didn't speak much, didn't cry the way people expected. My grief was slower, hungrier, a quiet, gnawing thing that stole my appetite and made silence feel like a second skin. But she'd warned me, prepared me, not for the pain but for the after. She'd left instructions. Not in a dramatic, cinematic way, just gentle breadcrumbs scattered throughout her final weeks. She told me where to find the journals she'd filled, the letters she'd written but never sent, the folder labeled, "Continue." Inside it were notes, ideas, projects she hadn't finished, but didn't want to die with. She wanted me to pass them on, not execute them, not own them, just hand them off, like seeds in someone else's pocket. So I did. One by one, I called the people she mentioned. I mailed sketches to a woman in Montana who dreamed of starting a retreat for survivors. Sent annotated manuscripts to a professor in Vermont who was building a curriculum for ethics in business. I found a recording, just audio, of Emily reading children's stories she'd written late at night when she couldn't sleep. I sent it to a librarian in Texas who played them during weekend story hours for kids who didn't have parents at home. Her voice lived on in classrooms, in basements, in headphones worn by people she never met but somehow still knew. And slowly, painfully, beautifully, I began to understand her final lesson. You don't have to be present to keep giving. Legacy isn't marble statues or million-dollar grants. Legacy is a widow in Nebraska starting a letter-writing group because she saw it work. It's a young couple choosing to start a business rooted in kindness instead of greed. It's someone pausing, just once, in the middle of a hard day and asking, what would she do? And through all that, I began to change. I started walking again, not just for exercise but for clarity. Every morning, same trail behind the cabin, same time. Sometimes I talked to her like she was right beside me. Sometimes I didn't speak at all. But always I felt her there. In the wind, in the creak of the trees, in the birds that landed just long enough to remind me that movement is life. And then, one morning, I knew. It was time to write her story. Not as an epic, not as a brand, but as a thank you for what she gave me, for what she gave the world, and for what she taught us all. That success isn't power, it's presence. That wealth isn't ownership, it's impact. And that leadership, real leadership, isn't loud, it's love. So I picked up a pen and began. I wrote like a man possessed, not with speed but with purpose. Each word placed carefully, deliberately, like I was rebuilding her with sentences. Not her body, not her title, but her essence. I wrote about the late nights, the early fights, the tiny moments that never made it to the boardroom or the keynote speech. I wrote about the way she stood barefoot in the kitchen humming to herself as she made oatmeal. How she always double-knotted her shoelaces like a kid. How she danced alone in our living room to music from 20 years ago. Singing off-key and offbeat but always with joy. I wrote about the doubt, the betrayal, the weight she carried that no one saw. How she would sit up in bed some nights, fists clenched, jaw tight, staring into the dark with a look that said the world is too heavy, and still, get up the next morning and pour herself into the day like the night never happened. I wrote about how she never let ambition steal her softness. About how she turned a failing business into a global engine without ever stepping on a single neck to get there. About how she led not with charisma, but with conviction. And when I finished, when the last word hit the last page, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt still, like I had exhaled something I'd been holding for years. I didn't send the manuscript to a publisher. I didn't put it on Amazon. I didn't chase blurbs or marketing plans. I printed 100 copies and gave them away. To schools, to libraries, to the people who wrote her letters over the years, to strangers who needed the reminder that someone like her had existed. I titled it simply, "She Built Something Bigger." No subtitle. No author name. Just that sentence. Because it wasn't about me. It never was. One day, I visited a high school where one of the teachers had made the book required reading for a senior ethics class. I sat in the back as the students discussed Emily's choices. One girl raised her hand and said, she didn't want to be famous. She wanted to be useful. Another added, she didn't take power. She gave it away. And a boy in the back, quiet all class, finally spoke up. She made me feel like I could matter, even if I don't get rich, even if I don't have a plan. I left the school with tears in my eyes and her name echoing in my chest like a drumbeat. Months passed. Letters still arrived. People left gifts by the cabin gate, carved stones, candles, folded notes with trembling handwriting. One day, someone planted a tree just outside the fence line, with a wooden sign at the base that read, "In honor of the woman who listened." No name, no credit, just that. And that's when I knew. She had become what she always wanted to be, a quiet revolution that never needed to shout to change the world. Years have passed now. Seasons have folded over each other like pages in a well-worn book. The cabin is quieter, but not empty. Her voice doesn't echo through the halls the way it used to, but somehow, it's louder in the space between things. In the way light lands on her chair in the morning. In the smell of cinnamon tea rising from the mug I still make for her out of habit. In the creak of the floorboards she once danced across barefoot at midnight. People still come. Not in crowds, not to gawk or mourn, but to sit, to feel, to remember. They leave their shoes at the door without being told, lower their voices when they cross the porch, as if instinctively understanding they've stepped into something sacred. They walk the trail out back where we used to wander. They visit the memory library. Some stay for an hour. Some stay for days. No one leaves the same. One afternoon, I found a note tucked into the spine of one of her journals. I don't know who left it. It wasn't signed. Just a simple line that said, "You didn't just build something big. You built something that made the rest of us want to build." I read it out loud to myself. Then again. Then I pinned it to the wall above her desk, right next to that first letter from Clara in Kentucky, the one that started the ripple we didn't even know we were creating. And as I stepped back, as I looked at the life she'd left behind, not a monument, but a map, I felt something I hadn't in a long, long time. Peace. Because now I know what legacy really means. It's not being remembered. It's reminding others who they are. It's the kind of impact that doesn't carry your name, but carries your values in the hearts and hands of people you'll never meet. Emily Harrison didn't die with a company. She lived on as a compass, a lighthouse, a quiet note tucked into the chaos of a loud world, saying, "You are not too small to matter. You are not too broken to build. You are not too late to start." And me? I live simply. I keep the fire going. I answer letters. I tend to the trees. And every night before I go to sleep, I whisper into the dark. She did it right. And she taught me how to try.